All right, man. We'll just get right to it. Um, Obviously, both of us have grown up in military families. Both of our parents, both of our dads were career officers in the U.S. military. What impact do you think that had on you as an adult after being around your family, being around the military in that facet, and what do you take from that?
Well, I think it's informed my desire to be of service. I mean, we grew up in patriotic families where service was a high calling and virtue, and I've always wanted to serve my country. That's what propelled me to go to West Point and be an Army officer, and then serve tours in combat. And so I think that informs why I'm running for Congress. I mean, I still have a desire to be of service, especially in this critical time. We are in a time of crisis where things aren't going right, and a lot of it's a direct result of failed government policy. So for me, running for Congress is a call of duty. It's serving my country in a different capacity. In this case, it's political.
Yeah, totally get that. In regards to your childhood and like kind of how you grew up, kind of switching hats for a second here, what kind of advice or lessons would you take away from your childhood, like from your family dynamics that you're trying to instill in your kids today?
Well, I mean, we grew up, both of us grew up all over the world, right? We became citizens of the world. We were moving every couple of years and living in different types of communities. And the military is a pretty integrated community of different races, genders, backgrounds. People come from all over the country or all over the world uh, and participate in the armed services. And so you learn how to adapt. You learn how to be flexible. You also learn that you don't know everything. Your particular perspective or what you were taught might not, be the ultimate truth. So I think it instills in you a level of tolerance, but also an understanding of the world that a lot of people don't have the luxury of having if they grow up in one place their entire life. So I want my kids to experience all types of different cultures. I want them to grow up accepting others for who they are. I mean, I love the quote, and it's something very relevant right now that we need to be judged on the content of our character, not the color of our skin, right? We need to focus on what's inside. We need to focus on what's common to all human beings and not get caught up in superficial differences. And I think right now we can look at what is happening with the Supreme Court and Biden's comment to nominate a woman of color to the Supreme Court as though that's the highest qualification. And I think that's absolutely absurd. And I'm going to raise my kids to not look at the exterior, but to look at the interior of people.
Yeah, and the irony of what you just mentioned is that even pretty staunch Democrats are actually going against that as well. They want the best quality candidate. And so at least there are
That's
some
right.
people that have some intestinal fortitude to go against their own party in a sense of like, this isn't right. Um, Another question about,
Well,
go ahead.
I want to say Americans are rejecting this racist ideology because that's what it is. Biden's statement is a racist comment, and most Americans are smart enough to recognize that. And it's antithetical to the founding principles of this country. It's antithetical to everything that we believe in, equal opportunity. And so the ability to pursue life, liberty, or the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is captured in the Constitution. So, yes, I think that it's great to see Americans of all types and all political affiliations rejecting that kind of ideology. It's hateful and it's divisive, and it has no place here in this country.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also misconstrued equal opportunity for equitable outcome, and we got to separate the two.
Right.
You get the at bat, but you don't get to feel the same rewards from the work ethic and the dedication that you have to pursuing a goal in life. In that sense,
That's exactly right. And
um,
both you and I mean, we were high school friends. I mean, we we have both worked very hard to get where we're at in life. None of it was handed to us. I mean, yes, we were blessed with certain things growing up in our families, but we took those blessings and we applied them, and then put our lives on the line in certain respects to get where we're at.
Right. Going a little bit back real quick to family life, like how do you balance the ambition you've had in your career with the family life? Any tips for regular folks that you can think of that kind of get you through the day knowing like why you're doing what you're doing?
Well, finding balance in this modern life is difficult. I have three little kids, 7, 4, and 10 months, and I've been married for over 15 years at this point. It's been a continual effort to balance my ambition or what I want to accomplish outside in the world with maintaining my family and being a good husband and father and all those different responsibilities. It's not an easy task. And I think that to do that requires continual effort, especially to keep a family together, to maintain a marriage, to give kids what they need, a nurturing environment that gives them the opportunities that I was blessed with. So in terms of tips, I think in many ways I had to cut my own personal desires so that I could focus on family. And at this point, between running for Congress and having a family, those are basically the only two things I do. I don't have a lot of hobbies, but those are my priorities. And for me, it's God, family, country, and a balancing act to keep those all in perspective.
Yeah, I totally get that and totally agree with you. In this day and age, I envy people who keep it all together with everything that's been thrown at families and even friends, you know, like yourselves, you know. I mean, it's not easy at any capacity to keep things, keep the train going in that sense. Kind of looking at like how you got to who you are today, you know, obviously your dad was also in the military. Did you always plan kind of to go in your father's footsteps, or is that something that just kind of evolved as you grew older for yourself?
My dad was my hero as a young man. I mean, as a kid, really, I wanted to be like him. I've always had great respect for my father. I love what he stood for. I mean, character and doing the right thing was instilled in me from a very young age, and I respected him and I wanted to be like him. So that's what led me to West Point. That's what led me to become an Army officer. That's what I wanted to do. I thought I'd make a career of it, but as you grow older, you start to realize that you're not the same person as your parent. You might idolize them, you might want to be like them, but then life starts to introduce new perspectives, and then you make the best decision.
Totally. Just a fun fact. Eric's dad actually enlisted me into the service, which was a pretty cool thing.
That's right.
Because he got to put on his belt and swear me in, which is a pretty awesome thing. I think I have a picture somewhere. If I find it, I'll definitely send it to you. With that, you're talking about service, your time in the military. What would you think your biggest takeaway from your time in service was?
That's a great question, Ben. Well, I mean, I think going through what we went through in terms of combat experience, it certainly tests your character, right? It forges you in fire, and it makes you grow up very quickly. So I did grow up very quickly with my experiences in Iraq. I was what, 22 when I led a tank platoon and saw some difficult things that really most people can't envision, and that'll accelerate your growth. But I think it also deepened my love for this country. It made me really respect veterans and their willingness to sacrifice for this country. Less than 1% of people serve, and there are far too few in Congress or in government who have served in combat. And so I want to represent veterans, but I also want to bring that experience into Congress because it's so necessary. I mean, we have politicians who are so quick to commit service members to war, and we can see the situation in the Ukraine and Russia, and the Biden administration's foolish handling of the situation that might lead us into war. I've grown to have a reticence for violence. I abhor violence. When you've witnessed it firsthand and you've committed violence, you don't want it, you don't relish it. You want to make sure it's used judiciously. And so I think wisdom, just because I know the horrors of war and I can articulate those, or I can feel them. You know, maybe I can't explain to somebody who's never experienced it what it feels like, but I certainly know what it feels like. And as a leader, that shaped me.
Yeah. Speaking of being a leader, is there a particular person or people that you remember from your time of service that really made a huge impact on the way you look at life today?
I think that non-commissioned officers probably had the greatest impact on me. I mean, I can always look up the chain of command, but when you're around seasoned professionals who I mean, that is what makes a good officer. I think I came, you know, a lot of West Pointers come out of the academy thinking they know everything. I might have been susceptible to that if I hadn't had such great non-commissioned officers who were willing to steer me in the right direction.
Yeah.
I also want to mention there is one individual. I was an aide de camp to a Canadian general officer, so I won't go into the details of how that happens in the Army. But anyway, I worked for a man named Peter Devlin. He became the commander of the Canadian Armed Forces. But the one thing that he did that was different from a lot of American Army officers was he put people first. And his philosophy was that if you take care of your people, the mission will be accomplished because they will be motivated and inspired to accomplish it. I've never forgotten that lesson. And I think it's a careful balance, especially in the Army, when you have combat missions and you're putting people in harm's way, that you balance care for people with the mission. And we don't always do that so well in the American Army, but this man taught me the importance of taking care of people and really working with each individual. Everybody's different. Everybody has different desires and motivations. And a leader, you've got to be able to tailor how you lead to specific individuals.
Totally. Speaking of, you know, the values that we try to instill as leaders onto the people that we work with and vice versa, 2021 was a rough year for veterans in particular, obviously due to the hasty withdrawal of Afghanistan, to put it bluntly. First off, how did you feel about that, having invested time personally in that region? And then secondly, what do you think could have been done differently, even if it was a staged withdrawal of some kind? Or we know we had to get out of there, but maybe offer some insight on how, if you were the commander-in-chief or you were in Congress voting on a withdrawal, like what would be those implied and specified tasks that you would think would have to get done to make that happen?
Well, I felt a very strong reaction to what happened in Afghanistan, a mix of rage and sadness, because what happened there should never have occurred. The top brass of the military, it is hard to excuse them because they must have known what would have occurred if we withdrew in that manner. We know that you never leave $85 billion worth of sensitive equipment in country to fall in the hands of our enemies. We knew that we had to have known that was not just going to stay in Afghanistan, that in that region it was going to fall into the hands of the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians. I expect that it has or will. there's, the loss of life that occurred. What was it, 13 or 14 service members who were killed because we dropped our security. The way it was managed, leaving Americans behind without ensuring that civilians were out of the country first. First you get civilians out, you make sure they're safely out, you do it in an orderly fashion. We know everybody who's there, passport system and how you get into it and out of country. You don't get in there without us knowing that you're there. So you get them out first. Then you get the equipment out or you blow it in place. And then you do an orderly withdrawal of troops. I think there was some merit to leaving a small contingent in Afghanistan. We'd been down to a couple thousand troops at that point and had relative stability. We also knew that the Afghans were not in a position to maintain security. They didn't have the competency. We knew that a decade ago when I was training Afghan border police in the region, that they were never going to be fit to maintain stability. It's a tribal country. There's all kinds of internal conflict. It's 1,000 years behind the rest of civilization. The areas I was in didn't have electricity or running water. People were living in mud huts. So we knew the situation, and this disaster has far-reaching consequences that is emboldening our enemies right now. It's emboldening China, who's rattling their sabers against Taiwan. It's emboldening Russia, perhaps, with the Ukrainian situation. And it's because we have a feckless and weak administration that is incompetent and is presenting a weak front to the world. And the world's more dangerous because of that. I believe in peace through strength, as Ronald Reagan spoke about. I believe Trump's policies were indicative of peace through strength. People took us seriously, and now we're a laughingstock, and the world's more dangerous. And it's just unconscionable and extremely disappointing and disheartening. I still have a lot of emotion wrapped up in it.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I feel your sentiment. But I guess maybe if I could push back a little bit in a sense, you mentioned that a decade earlier we knew the situation on the ground was not going to be kind to us when we left at some point, right? And I would think
Right.
that commissioned officers such as yourself had the fortitude to tell their commanding officers that in reports and moving up and everything else, and that we've been there already a decade, and we're saying it's not changing. These people are inept on what we're trying to teach them, how to build this nation up into something of a quasi-modern nation with the help and the guidance through the military. Why do you feel that the general officers and other folks didn't heed those warnings earlier and come up with a more congruent plan to leave?
I think that's a very insightful question. I did voice my concerns to my chain of command when I was there. I said I wanted to know what we were trying to accomplish. I had a basic understanding of my tactical objectives. I was in charge of the border crossing point between Afghanistan and Pakistan in Kandahar district, so Spin Boldak, which was considered the second most strategic location in the country because of all the material we were bringing up from Pakistan through Karachi. Critical point. Had the ISAF commander, General McChrystal, visit my troop more than once, and had General Petraeus come and visit us as well. So there was a lot of eyes on what we were doing, but nobody could explain the long-term strategic objectives in Afghanistan. And that contributed to me leaving the Army in 2011 after I redeployed. And I never questioned the chain of command unprofessionally. I always did what I was asked to do, and I did it to the best of my ability. But it reached a point where I lost faith in our leadership, especially our commander-in-chief, who was Obama at the time. I thought that there was no clear exit strategy. There was no clear strategic objective in the country. And for me, that was unacceptable. How am I going to ask soldiers to die and put their lives at risk when I don't know what we're trying to achieve, and I don't know the benefit to the United States. So I think we should have been out of there long ago, maybe maintaining a small contingent there just because of the geopolitical implications of the country and the strategic nature of it. But at the end of the day, we need to learn it from our mistakes and not continue to repeat them as a nation. We should have learned from Vietnam, both in our prolonging of the war and our exit strategy. But we should never go somewhere without a clear strategic objective. What do we want to accomplish? I mean, so I think there are political agendas wrapped up in war. Clearly, there are agendas that have to do with corporations and money. I mean, Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
It needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be addressed. But we need leaders of character. Biden's the wrong person to do that. Absolutely the wrong person to do that. But we need people in Congress who will hold our armed forces and the commander-in-chief accountable for these decisions. It's not happening.
Yeah, no, and to be fair, I honestly have the same kind of backstory and the reason why I left the military. At some point, I got tired of yes men and not having the character to push back and challenge what the intent of these decades-long war were. At least be honest with us. If it's to hold land in a sense of finding natural, commodities of some kind here, and we need that to stabilize our country and be better as Americans, that's okay. At least I know. If you saying that we're staying here in perpetuity because of theoretically the corporate welfare state that we've created through some of our institutions that assist in Department of Defense and Department of State, I'm okay with that too, but at least I know, and I can make that decision as the individual to comply and be a part of that or not. And it seems like both of us chose the latter.
And I think the American people deserve transparency. They're not getting it. Their government is not honest with them. They don't talk about their motivations for war. And I think the American people deserve it. And another thing, the military right now is going through a crisis. And I had the pleasure of having a long conversation with Governor Rick Perry, who's, former governor of Texas and also a cabinet member, the Secretary of Energy under Trump. And he talked about the military and how it has changed institutionally from being a meritocracy to being becoming a bureaucracy, where it's less about the merit of officers or enlisted progressing through the system, and more about politics and pleasing the chain of command. This is a dangerous situation. There needs to be a dialectic within the armed forces, a challenging of the chain of command in the right fashion so that the right decisions are made. And we can see that it looks like the military is going through a purging effort of that kind of dialectic. And it is not the kind of military that is in principle what was meant to be in this country. It is meant to be a military of volunteers and smart thinkers who uphold their oath to the Constitution, not serve a specific personality or political bias.
Right. And then with that challenging and keeping, I guess, the institution honest, so to speak, given the current things that are unfolding in Ukraine at the moment, what do you feel the United States should be doing to assist their allies in a strenuous time in Europe currently with the ever-changing flow of, for example, Angela Merkel has just retired. We have these people that were the bedrock of Europe at that time, and we have new leadership coming up. Where's America's role in that world today with NATO and with everything else that's going on with Ukraine?
America should always be a leader. The United States should always offer leadership to Europe and set the right example. It is hard for us to set the example, though, that that is needed for the world based on our conduct in Iraq and Afghanistan, wars that I would say were tragedies of national policy, and perhaps in retrospect should have been avoided or handled differently. We need to exhaust all diplomatic and economic options to avoid conflict. And we don't want war with Russia. That we are not in a position to be fighting that war. It will embolden China. It has second and third order consequences that are far reaching and may destabilize the globe further. I mean, we should expect NATO to uphold its end of the bargain. We should not have created an environment where all the NATO nations are completely dependent on the United States for their security. They should be upholding their end of the treaty and doing whatever they need to do to manage their own national defense. And stability comes from strong nations working in concert. We need alliances, but the United States has footed the bill and managed the security in Europe far too long, and it's made them weak. And so we need to be encouraging our NATO allies to have strong military forces that can counterbalance threats from Russia or other actors. And right now, they may not be in a position to do so. But I want to avoid war. I don't think we should be the world police. We need to lead by example, not do everything for everyone else.
Absolutely. And then obviously, let's be honest, the military and State Department have spent so much money in the last 2 decades. You know, as we draw down from these decades-long conflicts, should there be also a drawdown in budget? The fact that it's slowly creeping up to $1 trillion per year, and now we've withdrawn from those particular conflict regions that we instigated. How do we stay relevant and manage the resources to be better effective into going into the plan that you're referring to before?
Well, first of all, I'd like to see an audit of where all that money went.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know that there's transparency. I think a lot of it has fallen into black holes. A lot of it's probably fallen into the hands of people we don't want it to. I question our bureaucracy's ability to manage the money, whether it's the military or 3-letter agencies or our very vast intelligence apparatus. We need to know where that money is going. And these agencies don't want us to know. They love having under the table money, you know, the money that goes into black ops and gets distributed. So we need to be clear. I think we need to audit the entire system of our intelligence and our services to see where that money's been going, especially the State Department. I know they will resist that to the death. Nevertheless, there needs to be a vast drawdown in waste and abuse, because I think that it is an extremely wasteful system, especially how we manage our contractors all over the world. We've got to get a handle on that. I think you can cut out a lot of waste and reduce the budget to still maintain effectiveness if you didn't have so much waste in the system. At the end of the day, I want a strong military. The United States should not cede its primacy to China or Russia or any other nation. We are, for the most part, still the greatest example of democracy on the planet, and we are guided by principles that other nations aren't. So we need to get reoriented and get back on track and get back to our attunement with those principles. But at the end of the day, I'd much rather have the United States be the prime superpower on the planet than China.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch a little gear to like more domestic issues and local politics. Living in Colorado and having campaigned in various parts of the state before, and then also obviously right now in your potential district that you have here. What's your pulse on the people having lived through a pandemic for the last almost 2.5 years now?
I think people are tired. I think people are, for the most part, tired of the overbearing presence of government in their lives. They're being tired of the mandates and the lockdowns and the intrusions that government is imposing, whether it's this attempt to force vaccine mandates or mask mandates or restricting our freedom to assemble. In nature, these things are unconstitutional, and they're driven by unelected bureaucrats. And we allowed a situation to occur that never should happen in this country. I think people are tired of the fear narrative. I mean, that they're constantly bombarded by the mainstream media with fear that is not based in truth, and that needs to be reoriented. I think there's a massive loss of trust, both in the media and other institutions, especially government. But at the end of the day, I think for the most part, people want to get on with their lives and get back to some sense of normalcy. The question is how do we do that, especially with the impact that's been made on our children? Our children have been psychologically traumatized by this overblown forcefulness of fear that really we've got a lot of healing to do as a society. The division, the polarization is toxic and destructive. We've got to heal those wounds. We've got to get back to being Americans and come together. Everything's been politicized. I mean, it has been a rough couple of years, and it's time for us to heal as a nation and get back to normalcy, get back to living life.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest issue currently is on Coloradans' minds, and maybe even in your district? And how do you think you'll try to rectify some of their concerns if elected to Congress?
I think Coloradans are feeling a great sense of insecurity. They don't know who to trust. They see that inflation is out of control because our government is spending recklessly and abusively. They are concerned about rising crime. Crime's out of control in Denver. I mean, I think I read somewhere that a car is stolen every 14 minutes, and car break-ins are up 200%. I mean, there's a lot of instability with the homelessness problem in Denver and along the Front Range. So people are concerned about crime. They're concerned about their children's education with all the lockdowns and back and forth. Children are way behind in their learning. They're concerned about mask mandates, which are totally unnecessary for children. So I think economy, crime, or public safety and education are top of the list. But the other things that a lot of conservatives I talk to are very concerned about immigration and the porous southern border and the million plus illegal immigrants that have come across, putting further drain on our economy, and the human trafficking and drugs that are coming across the border. This impacts our national security. I mean, we also have an issue with energy policy that, most Coloradans, they may not be fully aware, but this is traditionally an oil and gas state. And we've lost a lot of jobs because of Governor Polis and the state legislature with Senate Bill 181, which has very much impacted the industry. But they can see the price of gasoline. They're struggling to heat their homes. I mean, all the while, Biden kills the Keystone Pipeline and then gives the green light to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Europe. And now we've got the situation with Russia and Ukraine. So people are feeling a general sense of instability and insecurity and fear because we don't have strong leadership at the helm.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from with that. Obviously the Biden administration has had some of the lowest approval ratings since Jimmy Carter. Should there be age limits to being president, or possibly even tests for cognitive abilities?
I think at this point, we need to have that conversation and strongly consider that. I think it's clear that Biden is not operating at full mental capacity. I don't know that he's fit to be president of the United States, the most powerful country, still the most powerful country on the planet. And it's a very dangerous situation. So I think we should thoughtfully consider age limits. There's a point where age is a real thing. It's not ageism to say that you reach a point where you can't function as you did when you were younger. And especially for the presidency and maybe the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate.
These people are in their 80s, Speaking of Congress, one thing that's kind of gaining steam in the public arena is Congress folks trading stocks, like individual stocks. Given that many people on both sides of the aisle honestly have enriched their personal wealth while in office based on the information that they're privy to. First, do you think Congress folks should be trading personal portfolios given the nature of the information that they have access to? And then
No.
Okay. And so what would you consider would be an alternative to that, having some kind of index funds or somebody else, like a third party managing their portfolio in some way?
I think that's a smart idea. I mean, nobody should come out of Congress having hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there needs to be restrictions against insider trading, just like there would be on anybody serving on a corporate board or as
Right.
part of a corporation. What we want to do is encourage that our members of Congress be public servants, beholden to the people. And we want to reduce any ability for them to be corrupted. And I think that there's a great danger that our elected leaders make decisions based on what benefits them and not the American people. So I think there needs to be clear restrictions against insider trading for them and their family members. I mean, I think that Nancy Pelosi is a great example of somebody who's got hundreds of millions of dollars and it's all attributed to her husband's decisions. Well, to think that she's not complicit in that, I think is ridiculous. And so, yes, I think there need to be strong restrictions. And then, of course, we also don't want to inhibit personal investments, and we want our members of Congress to have similar opportunities to private citizens, but it needs to be in balance.
Yeah, and nobody's saying that they can't do anything after their public service, right?
Right.
DC has a revolving door of folks working in organizations where they go out and work in the consulting realm, make their actual cash, and then come back into the realm and slowly as consultants as well, but like on particular projects they might have been working on before. So there are ways to do it. It's just a matter of them not wanting to give up that seat of power and position and authority in that sense for the greater good of the community.
That's right. And the message should be, if you want to make a lot of money, leave public office.
Right.
I think their salary is comfortable, and it should be comfortable, but it should not be extreme. And what we want is people in office who want to be there as a desire to serve their constituency, not serve their own ends. So honestly, incentivize those who want to make a lot of money to leave.
Right. No, it makes total sense in what you're saying, and I think that as we've alluded to in this entire conversation, to serve means to serve others, not yourself. And I think sometimes that lesson, if you are a green legislator, becomes convoluted in some ways because of how much effort it took to get there. I think a lot of people say, okay, it's my time to, become that person in that way where I have accumulated the power and the affluence that I need to succeed past my term if it goes to that level. Speaking of which, with like what's on everybody's mind, we're talking about some of the economy. The Federal Reserve has printed so much money in the last 2.5 years. Do you feel it was needed at the time, and what steps do we take in the future to ensure that we have some kind of contingency plan for Americans and our economy in a state of an active God crisis, as we thought the pandemic might have been, regardless of what happened afterwards? But there are instances in life where, you as an individual, you could have saved, you could have done all the right things, and you're still kind of down on your luck. What do you think America needs to have for the people, in a sense of when something crazy like this were to happen again? Do we need a contingency plan, on a macro strategic level, to have these mechanisms in place to be utilized in the future?
I mean, America has gone through great crises in history, and to think that those crises, the solution is to print more money, is absurd. America is a strong country, and it's kind of like when a family goes through hard times, they tighten the belt. They don't put it all on credit cards and buy a bunch of things that don't help solve the problem. At some point, those credit cards have to be paid. And whatever the Federal Reserve has printed, and I don't think we don't have transparency in what they do. They're a private institution without a lot of oversight. They've never been audited. And so, do I trust that what they say they've printed is the actual figure? No, because several times, and I think there's documentation approved with the 2008 bailouts, that they printed and printed far more money than the government gave them the reins to do. So we need smart fiscal policy. We need a country that is strong all the way down to the community levels, and that means allowing for ingenuity and creativity to solve problems, not just throwing money at it. And I think that the American people have been complacent because they expect the government to bail them out of any problem. Right? You lose a job, you expect the government to bail you out. And I think that there are certain safeguards that are necessary because there are unexpected things that occur. So I'm not saying don't have unemployment, but have it in balance in a way that incentivizes hard work and ingenuity and creativity to solve problems, not just makes us lazy and weak. And what we have is a situation where the American people have become dependent on the government. And that was never meant to be how this country functions. The government might be a safety net, but we're supposed to be strong individuals who can work together. And especially the importance of the family unit plays into here. But what the government is doing in many respects is eroding the nuclear family. And there's a lot of agencies out there trying to do that. We need strong people who can come together in times of crisis and weather the storm. There's always going to be hard times. And the more dependency we have on the government, the less self-sufficient we are, the less able we are to respond to crises, and the more our children pay by shouldering a debt that I don't even know how we address the debt at this point. But it's not by printing more money.
Right. And I think people always generally forget that inflation is a blind tax on middle class and poor people. And the depreciation of our value of purchasing power of our dollar inherently doesn't affect people who own securities, doesn't affect people that own property. It affects people at the lowest rungs of our society.
That's right.
With the likelihood of this red wave coming into this midterm election, it's going to be a great time in history in all retrospects for the Republican Party. How do you feel that they can best utilize this momentum to affect change for the daily lives of Americans?
By bringing real solutions that have a positive impact. As a Republican Party, we can't just campaign on partisan politics. We actually need to bring solutions that positively affect Americans and Coloradans every single day, right? And we can look at the dramatic decline in just about every facet of our life over the last year. The current administration and what the Democrats are trying to accomplish is not working, does not serve the average American or Coloradan. And so we need to reject that and at the same time bring things that work. I mean, under the previous administration, things were functioning. The economy was thriving. Job growth was at all-time highs. Industry was getting revitalized. We were creating opportunity in this country. And there was international stability unlike we've seen over the last 2 decades. So we need to restore our national security. We need to restore the border. We need to get crime under control in all our cities and urban centers. We need to revitalize the economy by creating jobs and bringing industry back to the United States, not sending it overseas. We need to curtail the economic rise of China and others and keep that in balance. Do that through energizing the United States economy. And by being a leader and doing and using right policies, it's all rising tide lifts all boats. It actually benefits the world. With socialist ideologies, it harms the world. So we need fiscal conservatism. We need to have smart spending. We need to really look at our government waste and abuse, especially the unelected bureaucracy. And there are so many things we can do to get this country back on track if Republicans can come together and stop bickering within our own house, because we tend to do that. And we need strong leaders, and we need people of character who are in office because they want to serve this country and their constituency, not pad their own pockets. So I'm asking people to be very careful with how they vote and do a thorough assessment of the person's character before they put them in office.
Yeah. In light of that, if elected to office, what are some things that you feel that could be worked on, that you'd be willing to work on in a bipartisan nature with the other side to actually get some things done during your tenure?
I will always work in a bipartisan way if it's serving my constituency. If it is positively impacting the economy, if it's cutting spending and lowering taxes and enhancing our national security and making us a stronger country, I have no problem working across the line. It is only when those across the aisle are totally working against the interests of the United States. We need to put this country first. We need to put our people first. That's what we're elected to do. And I'm shocked that anybody gets into office and doesn't put their people first and continues to get reelected. I'm not going to put Russia or China or Pakistan or Mexico or Canada or any other country before the United States. I'm elected to serve the people of Colorado and District 7. And at the end of the day, I'm elected to serve this country. And that doesn't mean at the expense of other countries or at the expense of the global community. It just means doing it in concert in a way that ultimately serves the people I represent, which is Colorado and District 7 and the United States of America. And we need to reject any leader who in fact, I would call it traitorous if you're putting another country in front of the U.S. because you're a United States congressman or congresswoman or elected official.
Yeah, no, that you hit it right on the nail. And with that, though, obviously, there's been a lot of talk of these corporations that have reaped a lot of the benefits of the policies that have been implemented in the last 2 to 3 years, specifically with having basically free money to go borrow and have these crazy smaller rates. So they're getting all these loans. They've, companies during the time of the pandemic with the PPP loans, corporations were able to get a lot of free money that they didn't have to pay back if they kept people on the payroll, such as airlines, such as other folks like that. Does there need to be a shift in corporate ideology regarding exactly what you were referring to before? Is like America first kind of scenario. When we see the supply chain issues, when we see other things where we've basically whittled down our supply chain line and everything in the United States and offshored a lot of things in that sense, that's not beneficial to the average American or people like within your district, for example. What can we do as a nation and the leaders of our nation to ensure that they are looking out for the best interests of the American people and not for corporations?
Yeah. So for those socialists out there, those who think socialism is a good idea, let me tell you something. Bailouts and government funding of corporations is not capitalism.
Right.
And in fact, it's creating the situation that most liberals I talk to don't want. I talk to liberals who are afraid of corporations taking over. Well, what do you think that government bailouts do? And what do you think that socialism leads to? It's the union of government and corporations. That is not capitalism, and that's not a free market society. What we do need is smart regulations that inhibit monopolies or corporations from abusing their power. But at the same time, the government should not be voting on what corporations succeed and which ones do not. That de-incentivizes smart decisions within corporations. If corporations continue to make bad decisions, in fact, they benefit from taking risks that should be unacceptable in a free market society. We need people to be educated and understand really what's going on, and how government involvement in funding of corporations is distorting free market capitalism and harming the American consumer. Absolutely. Right? It is a problem, and government has enabled corporations to fail and continue to fail and get away with it. And it is harming the consumer. It's driving up inflation. It's making everything more expensive, and it's reducing the quality of goods and services. So what we need to strive for is a balance between competition in the marketplace and public safety. And we have way gone off the rails in terms of enabling corporations, and it's at the detriment of our society. And so it's going to take some very smart people to right that ship. We've got to stop electing dumb people who don't really understand the situation or act as though they don't, so they can get away with their bad policies.
Yeah. I'm not sure you're aware of like what's happening where the railroad, BNSF, or the workers are trying to strike right now, and there's some act from 1926 that basically states that if they have to strike, it has to go to a judge in a sense of the labor, right? So they're allowed basically 7 days off a month to keep our supply chain going in that sense. They've restructured some of the contract stuff to where it says they're only allowed 2 days off. In the instance like this where it seems as if a corporation is taking advantage of the labor and skilled labor at that in that way, how do you feel like government should take a position on that? Or like, should we try to amend a rule from 1926 that's clearly in favor of the railroads or an industry in that sense to hold down the labor to increase the margins, for example, in the railroads? Because we know with inflation, they've charged more based on the services that they provide. But the people that are creating that wealth, the labor in that sense, is not reaping. They don't even want money. They want time off to be able to, like you were talking about, to stay safe, to make sure that they are compliant with the safety regulations that, the railroads probably need to ensure that they follow. What do you think about a situation like that where skilled labor force within the United States is trying to at least just become an equitable partner in a monopoly business in that sense? Like what does role of government have to do in that instance?
I mean, ultimately, government should play a very limited role in adjudicating issues between an employer and an employee. I mean, people have a right to strike, and I think that sometimes is necessary for a worker to be treated fairly. That we want the workforce to have a sense of power and an ability to influence how they're treated by their employer. I mean, only in times of great national crisis or urgency should the government intervene, and that should be very judicious. And to pass legislation that favors an employer over the employee, I think is fundamentally problematic.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think we should absolutely look at that act. I haven't read it, so I'm not completely familiar with what it says. But Yeah, I mean, government's role altogether should be very limited, right? We need to encourage a society that can think for itself without government intervention, and that creates a strong, thriving economy and a society that can weather fluctuations within the market or whether it's natural disasters or times of war. We want a resilient society. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the more the government intrudes, the more we have a big daddy trying to take care of us, the less resilient our society will be. And we know that it always fails and creates a much greater disaster in the end. History is replete with those examples. And it's time for us to learn from history and not continue to repeat these mistakes. And we know that socialism or communism is a failed methodology, and it always fails and always causes greater suffering than it was intended to address.
Yeah. No, I are definitely in agreement with that. And what makes America different, as we have traveled the world professionally and personally, is the promotion of the individual. Like, you have the agency to affect change by yourself. It's up to you to build a cohesive community to be able to do that, and you still have the agency every day to wake up, to do a good job, to make sure that you as an individual are a active participant of society, and instill those values in yourself, in your family, and in the future of this country. Thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy right now, going all over the place. I'm super elated to know you as a person, but then secondly, to understand that there are people that are just sick and tired of the way things are, and you're a perfect example of somebody that's taking action rather than reacting to the situation at hand, and wanting to make the U.S. and the world a better place by sacrificing your own time to ensure that happening, and be that conduit to the freedoms that we're slowly losing in our world today.
Thank you. A great pleasure to be on your show, man. I found this to be a really deep conversation. I don't always get that, but on every podcast or radio show, but this one was a really engaging dialogue, and I'm thankful that I was on your show and we had a chance to talk about some of these tough issues that must be addressed if we want a future for for my kids. And I know you don't have any kids, but maybe someday. But
yeah, no, I mean, if you want, like, we could definitely schedule another time, maybe a couple months down the road, and really address specific topics. I know this was more of a getting to know who you are as an individual, and kind of your ideology on the world and how we see it. But yeah, I would love to, like, dive into some of the more the policy stances that you have, and how to make sure and ensure that some of those things are going to happen as you get elected here.
that sounds great. I'd love to be back. This was great.
Awesome, man.
It made me think.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully we can do that more, just in general, with each other.
Sounds good.
Thanks, man.